Alright everyone, you remember the Bundy Ranch standoff years ago and how the Hammonds had been arrested for arson, and I think they were sentenced to about 5 or 6 years. Trump has just pardoned them. I strongly support this, and I'll tell you why. And at the time I was weighing in on sort of the Bundy Ranch stuff, I believe the Hammonds' so-called arson predates the actual standoff. I believe that's actually what led to it. That is, they got put in jail. Other people sort of organized their local militia, so to speak, and they're like, well, you know, the BLM has no claim to this. This is bullshit. The BLM comes in with other federal agents and police and stuff, and then everyone has a standoff. And by the way, a lot of people on the left at the time said, well, the Bundy people, they're like terrorists. They're standing there with guns, and it's like, well, they're not breaking any law. They're standing there armed. They're saying if we're fired upon, there's going to be a problem here, which is their constitutional right. At no time did they attack any federal officers. At no time did they attack the bureaucrats of BLM, who for some reason have like machine guns and shit. A little bit odd. That never actually happened. There was nothing terroristic going on. They showed significant restraint. The occupation later on of a federal building, I can't remember which one, maybe a little bit less restraint. People were like mailing them dildos and stuff, and it was kind of funny, but at the same time it's like, yeah, but you know, the government is basically abusing these people. I'm not surprised that they're doing this. Probably not the greatest response, but the underlying theme that I said, the underlying central thing that I noticed, was that BLM's treatment of this particular plot of land as though it was all important, made of gold, and they had to protect it with their lives against these horrible ranchers, was always bullshit. What had happened is that Bundy and others were grazing this land for some decades. And I believe it was intergenerational as well. They had been using the land, even though it wasn't theirs, but nobody had had a problem with them grazing it. BLM came in and used the excuse, well, there's like an endangered turtle or something here. You can't do it because it's an environmentally sensitive area. You can't graze it. You can't be on it. No, you can't. You can't set a brush fire to prevent a larger fire, even though you've been doing that too, because you know what you're fucking doing, and it's literally environmentally natural. You're not allowed to do anything there. Only BLM can, even if it's like hazarding nearby land because we're stupid. But it was an excuse. It was an excuse because a chunk of that land, supposedly, again, environmentally sensitive, there's like an endangered turtle or something living there. What did they actually have plans to do? It turned out later on that it was part of a planned solar field from a Chinese firm. So that's really what BLM was about. They wanted to clear the ranchers out so that China could build its solar field. Which, by the way, is ridiculous. The very fact that we make fields of solar instead of subsidizing it to be mounted on people's existing structures so it doesn't take up additional fallow land that could be forest, it could be a field, and it is environmentally friendly, it's totally beyond me. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's also a less protected situation as opposed to decentralizing it. But centrality is a sign of authoritarianism, so you understand what BLM is all about. I strongly support this because there was no particular evidence there was any malice involved, and I believe that they argued that they didn't even set the fire. That is, that there was already a fire and they were trying to cut it off from spreading by using a controlled burn. I believe that's what specifically they did. The government's like, no, you know, it doesn't matter, and they throw him in jail. Trump just pardoned him. Unconditional full pardon. That is, it's not a commutation. It's not, hey, you've served your time. You can come out. It's full pardon, which means they can go and get firearms and stuff. And trust me, after being abused and in jail for 3 years, I'm sure that they will. It was ridiculous that they went to prison. It was basically to make an example of people that the BLM thought was naughty. Basically, the government wanted to come in, do whatever it wanted. The government has a penchant for doing this. Hear me out. The government has a penchant for throwing people in prison on trumped-up charges. By just digging into them and finding whatever they can. Oh, you stole a stick of gum the other day, so we're putting you in for 90 days to try to get them out of the way. That is, even if it is unlawful for the government to act in such a manner, they like to simply jail other people who try to point that out. They'll harass people, they'll put them in prison, sometimes they'll make up a scenario to shoot them. It has happened. By the way, when you say this, you'll get called a tinfoil hatter. Then you can look at things like Kent State, a million other examples from our history, and then that claim begins to break down. It has quite clearly happened. The government acts unlawfully all the time. Usually, it refers to expedience. Well, it was necessary, so we had no choice. And people, unfortunately, gobble that shit argument down quite a bit. The Bundys did nothing terroristic or illegal. That's why do you think that these people largely avoided any repercussions for their actions? Because they didn't break any law. Standing there with a firearm on public land or on your own land, that's not against the law, at least according to their laws. Connecticut and Maryland natives aside, generally speaking in the United States, if you've got a firearm on you and you're just sort of standing there, you happen to be armed, you're saying, I'm not going anywhere, unless you're breaking some sort of trespassing rule, which they weren't, no, there's no law broken. Arson was used as an excuse to throw them in prison. It's just like, didn't they kill several of these people? They were at like a checkpoint in a pickup, and the feds just sort of opened fire and gunned them down in cold blood for no reason. And it was all very funny, and I believe that the government was found to have done wrong in that scenario. It's like, I think they got sued by the family successfully. It was just a shit show, because what it was, Obama wanted to make an example of people and do their Bible-thumping gun-toters thing, and be tyrannical, which is what he did. Trump, this is another bit of Obama's legacy, basically, when you really boil it down, that Trump is destroying. Because the successful prosecution of the originators of the whole Bundy standoff thing, now they're free. Trump is saying, well, no, government didn't make a compelling enough case that they had actually set a fire in the first place, so they shouldn't be in prison. By the way, 5 years for setting a fire, what did it destroy? What property damage was done, or was it just a brush fire out in the middle of fucking nowhere on a piece of fallow land they had been ranching anyway? Yeah, big problem. It's a huge problem, big issue. It's not an issue at all. BLM doesn't know how to manage land. That's the problem. It's like the EPA doesn't keep things clean, and the Department of Education doesn't teach people, and the Pentagon, has problems keeping people safe. The NSA doesn't catch terrorists. The CIA has no intelligence. Again, please don't, accidentally my car or something when I'm driving it. So it's just a joke, CIA. I'm just joking. No, these bureaus have so many problems. They don't really accomplish anything. They cost a lot of money. What are we paying these people for? What's BLM? What's the good that BLM does? It's like people are rambling about abolishing ICE. Oh, these conservatives should like it because it'll save money. Yeah, okay, that's fine. What about a million other bureaus, many of which are older, that have been totally inept? They've literally done nothing. Like, I remember during the Bush administration, people on the left were rambling about, well, the EPA is basically worthless now because Bush has instructed them not to really do anything. They've become little more than an industrial bureau at this point. Absolutely. Don't you think that at the very least you need reform when whoever happens to be the president can simply instruct a bureau not to do its job? Bush did that with the EPA. Obama did that with border control. He instructed them not to do their job properly, not to adhere to laws duly passed by Congress and the mandate of that bureau. We shouldn't even have these groups. It's not necessary. They're obviously not performing any function that we need. They're obviously not. By the way, somebody asked me the other day in the framed in the background of monarchism, well, what would you say about like the EPA and environmental protection? The EPA is worthless and should be disbanded. It doesn't do anything at this point. All you have to do is have a president that doesn't want them to do anything specific. Apparently, the EPA's job is completely malleable. That is, it's just another weaponized alphabet soup bureau that's used as a gadfly against whatever groups didn't donate to a presidential campaign. Well, that's ridiculous. They fucking get rid of them entirely. They shouldn't exist. Let some private group of scientists and local law enforcement make sure that Congress environmental legislation is actually adhered to. You don't need an EPA to do that anymore, and you need the Department of Education for people to be educated. It's not necessary. The states or even localities can do that themselves. Number two, though, frame it in terms of property damage. That is, fundamentally, if an industry next door is ignoring all possible norms and spewing out pollutants, it's violating my NAP. It's not because of some morally objective, well, save the trees, wipe your ass with an owl sort of thing. It's more like, hey, it's going to make me sick. And I believe in consumer protection in the sense of people should know what they're putting in their bodies. I do believe in GMO labeling. People should have choice, literally individual liberty, individual volition. So if an industry is going to come in, the people of that community should know exactly what they're doing at any given time. There does need to be oversight. But you don't need to strangle them with the 10,000 pages of regulations that require an army of lawyers to navigate. This makes costs higher. It's not necessary. The EPA especially not. So I'm glad that the Hammonds are out. They should never have been put in prison in the first place. If anything, the BLM members should have been put in prison because of that. They were the ones that were causing a situation that could have gone very, very wrong. It could have become 10 times worse than Waco, which itself was, government wrongdoing and abuse. That's about all. Peace out.